I absolutely do love adventure. I really, really love adventure. And when we think about adventure, it's not just in the office environment. I love in the wilderness. And these wilderness environments, they provide us with the opportunity to think and learn through exciting, foreign, new, fresh, sometimes scary, actually often scary, moments. But I don't want you to think either of adventure just by myself, but adventure with others, where we get to plan and co-create these experiences. Then we reflect afterwards, and we might just become better for next time. In fact, I was on an adventure not too long ago, and I found myself in a situation where I really did have to ask myself a question. What the hell am I doing here? Doctors have since described this moment as a sphincter tightening experience. I'm here with this buddy of mine, Kevin, and he's in front of me, and we're connected by just a single piece of rope, and we have to get from one side of this ridge to the other. And he says to me, Jamie, it's a long way down this ridgeline either side to the valley, about 700 metres, and it's a windy day. If I fall to the left, Jamie, you know what you have to do, don't you? Oh yeah, I had to jump to the right. I felt safer simply disconnecting myself from it. That's what was going through my mind. But in this moment, I did begin to ask myself something. Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we behave in a way that we behave? And why do we sign up for things, sometimes without realizing it? So this afternoon, I want us to go on an adventure. I want all of us to go on an adventure. And I want us to see where we land at the very end. So let's go. First things first, I want us to talk about breeds of birds. Strange, perhaps? Breeds of birds, now, they often behave, as you'll know, they come in different shapes and sizes, demonstrating a pattern of behaviour that's based on their strengths and weaknesses, or their habitat, or where they live and where they need to go. And for example, we're all familiar with the geese, right? There are efficiencies, proven efficiencies, in the way that they fly in this V formation. And when one of them becomes injured, a couple fall back to help it and support it, because they all believe that it's important that they all reach their end destination. And these birds, they're clever, right? They inspire each other, and they give each other encouragement during these long migrations, don't they? What do they say? Yeah, honk, honk, honk. Yeah, someone the other day said quack, I don't know what that meant. But that's one example. I want to introduce you to a different breed of bird. I'd like to introduce you to the red-billed quail from Africa. Now the quail, it's the most numerous wild bird on the planet, and flocks can consist up to 40 million. The largest flock ever recorded, in fact, took 5 hours to fly over the scientist recording it. And these flocks, they can destroy farmers' crops in just minutes. So there are lots of them. But I think there are a few things that we can learn from the quail. For example, the way that they fly, the patterns of behaviour when they're in the air. Some scientists one day sat down and watched these birds flying, and they found that these birds, they live by a set of rules that govern all of their actions. And so let's have a look at them flying. It's certainly not like the geese, but these are the rules that we came up with, or that the scientists realised. The first rule is that the birds, they always fly in the same speed. Flying at the same speed. And the second rule is that whenever they turn to where they perceive the centre of the group to be. And that's what's creating this meatball-like pattern when they're in the air, a little bit like fish in the ocean. So what does this tell us? What are these clues? What can they tell us about the bird's mindset? I think it's self-preservation. If you're the red-billed quail, make sure that your best friend is between you and the predator hawk that is looking at your flock like it's the menu of a restaurant. That's what I think we can learn from the quail. But let's just skip away from the birds for a moment. I want us to fly away from the birds and into the hive of a common honeybee. There has been no other insect that has served the needs of man like the bee. But please don't think that each bee is inspired by some sort of amazing personal honey making capability. In 6 weeks, a bee can only produce a gram of honey. And in fact, it takes 12 bees to make a teaspoon of honey. And on my farm in the Wairarapa, I'm a hobby beekeeper. I love having a few hives. And I've learned a few things over these last few years. In any hive, a hive can contain up to 60,000 bees. And every one of them has a very special job, including the undertaker bees, whose job it is to remove all of the dead from the hive. But there's something else special about these bees. They've got the most complex symbolic language that they use on the planet, outside of the primate family. In fact, some of these bees, they're so busy, every female worker bee can travel around and visit up to 2,000 flowers every single day. And you heard correctly, all of the ones that you see in your gardens are always women. So what are the men doing? What are the boys doing? A week after birth, the males, their job, mate with the queen, their job will be over. And at which point they have a job, and that's the meeting with the undertaker. That's what happens to them. But what clues does this give us about the bee's mindset? I don't think the mindset of the bee is anything like self-preservation like the bird. I think it's in fact preservation of their community. A sustainable hive with the queen at its core. So do the birds and the bees have anything to do with humans? I hope so. I hope so. It's the beginning of all of these parent-adolescent conversations, right? So what can we learn from the birds and the bees? Well, let's jump into a couple of adventures. Jump into a couple of adventures that I've had. Here I am with my adventure buddy Kevin, as we recreate these pioneering journeys by trailblazing pioneers from the last 100 years in a TV show called First Crossings. And here we are in this photo in an attempt by these two guys, two school teachers, Grave and Talbot, as they attempt to make a direct route through to Milford Sound, through an area called the Darren Mountains. Now the area, these Darren Mountains, it's jaw-dropping, the terrain, the waterfalls, the landscape, it's unbelievable. Anything you can imagine that's man-made would be dwarfed by the area through the Darren Mountains. Any human, when we're travelling through there, we would all feel like ants. But as we're doing this journey in the same clothing and using the same equipment as Grave and Talbot did, I did reach one point with Kevin, and let me show you what this point was. Now you might look at this image and you might think, okay Jamie, you need to climb up this ridgeline, walk along the ridgeline, and then just see where you get to at the end, and hopefully you'll reach Milford Sound like Grave and Talbot did. But this photograph is not of you looking up. This photograph is of you looking down. And that there is a lake at the bottom, and you can see two rivers feeding into it. The distance between where I was standing and that lake at the bottom, that's just over 1.5 kilometres. So we're standing at the top of this cliff, and Kevin and I have a conversation. And we say, do we need to go over? And I say to Kevin, this could be dangerous. And he says to me, the rope might break. And I sheepishly say, the TV people, they'll probably call that an ad break moment. But we say that we have this real chance to refuse to do this stunt, this part of the journey, because the risk involved. But instead our conversation changed tact, and we said, why are we here in the first place? Why did we sign up for this? And it became very clear. The reason for us doing the show in the first place is that we want to bring back to life these stories of trailblazing pioneers for a mainstream audience. We want to make people understand what these pioneers put themselves through to put New Zealand on the map. And so Kevin and I, we had the conversation and we said, if we don't go over the edge, will we adequately promote just how brave Grave and Talbot were? And we said, no, of course we wouldn't. And so for that reason, we had to go over. And I can stand here and say to you all, I have never been more frightened than that point there. I think I needed to change my trousers after that. But I don't like heights. Let's just move on to one more adventure. Let's move away from the cliff edge and let's just move to the transatlantic rowing race for a moment. A race between Africa and America, the Canary Islands to Barbados, 5,000 kilometres of ocean, and there are 19 crews vying to be the winner in Barbados at the end. Now we're in our little boat. It's like a bobbing cork on the ocean, and we'd be up against whatever the ocean puts up against us. But I want to describe something that happened during our race. Instead of every other day almost that was pleasant and flat seas and calm skies, there was one day that really stood out. And I want to show a little clip of what it was like. We were hit by a storm, and as I'm on my shift, trying to get towards the finish line, I take a stroke, and I travel from here to here. But I'm rowing into some headwinds trying to push us back, and head currents that are trying to push us back also. And so as I try and take another stroke, I move back here. So we're not travelling over the face of the planet. Kevin comes out of the cabin after his 2 hours sleep and he says, "How far have you gone?" And I had to say, "We haven't moved anywhere." And so we have this performance-based conversation. It's worthwhile saying that of the 40 days that we were at sea, this happened on day 2. But we realised that we had a conversation to have and we had a decision to make. Our options seemed very clear. We could choose between putting out the sea anchor or to keep rowing. Now the sea anchor, it's like a parachute. You drop it into the ocean, you drop it into the water, and with the wind trying to push you backwards, you're not meant to go anywhere. That's the theory. So we tried it for 5 minutes. But those head currents were there, and they started dragging us back toward the start line. So after those 5 minutes, we pulled it in and we said, "That's the pits. No more going backwards. We're going to keep on rowing and rowing and rowing." And we rowed and rowed and rowed for 42 hours without moving anywhere. Without moving anywhere. Yeah. I was pleased I'd signed up for it, right? But after 42 hours, I ring our manager on the satellite phone to hear the bad news and hear what those other 18 crews were doing, because we had no idea. And I ring him and I say, "How far behind are we?" And the words that I heard from him, I will never forget. He said, "Whatever you're doing, and whatever the conversation you've had, and however you've reflected and approached this storm, don't stop." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Every other crew decided to put their sea anchor out and keep it out. And now you're 30 miles in front because they all went backwards." So we haven't moved anywhere, and now we're leading the damn race by 30 miles. That's good, right? That's great. And so that's, say, day 4 by now, because of the 42 hours. Day 4. We keep on rowing. We see whales and dolphins and flying fish and ships and things. But we reach Barbados after 40 days, 5 hours, 31 minutes, and 27 seconds, thereabouts. Of the 19 crews that competed that year, we did win the race, and we won the world record. We broke the world record. But the question is, not about whether we won or not, but what was the difference or distance between us and second place? Yeah, 30 miles. After almost 6 weeks of rowing, you could argue the difference between first and second was a conversation that happened on day 2. On day 2, one conversation. Now, I was in Barbados for a week celebrating, and they make a bit of rum in the Caribbean. So I was in a state of reflection. And I could sort of pull a few insights from what we could learn from that. And there were some interesting, easy ones that became clear. On that storm, that day 2, we kept on rowing. We buckled down and worked hard. That's fine. But there was one other insight that I think is very important for us to recognise, and that's this. Sometimes when you think you're making the least progress, actually you're making the most. Sometimes when you're thinking you're making the least progress, actually you're making the most. For me, that was profound, and that stuck with me. But there was one other thing. Kevin and I, as we're having a rum punch in Barbados, we said, you know what? There was that conversation before the beginning of the race that held all of these decisions together. And we agreed before the beginning of that race that we wanted to reach the finish line without an ounce of energy, physical or mental. We wanted to get to the end of the race without an ounce of energy left on board the boat. And that was what governed all of these decisions. Interesting stories. But what on earth does a selfish bird, a collaborative bee, two guys on a cliff, or an ocean rowing race possibly have in common? I think I know. Every species of creature, or team within each species, there is one thing in common. They work tirelessly towards something that's important to them. They may not agree in each other's behaviours, decisions, priorities, or actions, but they are aligned to a common cause. Alignment, not agreement, to a shared purpose. Alignment, not agreement. You know, in this purpose, it translates into a sensory obligation that even during hardship or adversity, it still governs their pattern of behaviour and the way that they speak to one another, respond to one another, and the movement that they create. So if believing in and having a shared purpose can make birds fly in circles, bees dance in circles, for us to go over the edge of that cliff, or for Kevin and I to keep on rowing while others were happy to rest, doesn't it make sense for every single one of us to be very clear about what we stand for and what our purpose is? I think it does. You know, all too often, we hear people talk about how busy they are. And they sometimes come up with new ways of trying to become efficient at what they do. But shouldn't we be asking, why are they busy in the first place? I want us all to consider something. I want you to remember something. It's this. If you do not know what you stand for, you'll fall for anything. If you don't know what you stand for, you'll fall for anything. If you can understand what you stand for and the pattern of behaviour you're trying to create and how you want yourself and others around you to make decisions, you might just be able to say yes a little less, no a little more. And if you're lucky, you'll have time for a honey sandwich at the end of the day. Thanks very much.